Good morning and welcome to today's Cannabis and Hemp Research Forum hosted by the UC Davis Cannabis and Hemp Research Center. I'm co-director Li Tian. The purpose of this monthly forum series is to introduce our campus community, to inform our campus community, members of the cannabis and hemp industry, and also the general public on cannabis and hemp research being done at UC Davis, and also to provide an opportunity for guest external researchers to share their expertise. As today's presentation is underway, you will be able to pose written questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. Our presenters will save time at the end to address your questions. This presentation is being recorded, and the recording will be made available in the next few days on the Cannabis and Hemp Research Center website at cannabis.ucdavis.edu under the Education tab. And now for today's research forum, we welcome Professor Houston Wilson from UC Riverside. Houston is an IPM specialist stationed at the Kearney Agricultural Research Extension Center. He is also the founding director of the UC Organic Agriculture Institute. We're also very fortunate to have a second speaker today. Dr. Katie Britt is a postdoctoral scholar in the entomology department at UC Riverside. Katie is working with Houston on managing pests that attack hemp and cannabis, as well as the navel orange worm that attacks almonds and pistachios. So today, Houston and Katie will share with us their progress on developing integrated pest management for cannabis in California. Welcome, Houston and Katie.
Thank you so much. It's a great opportunity to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Katie and I are going to do a joint presentation. As usual, the postdoc will do the heavy lifting, and I'll kind of give our broad introductory work. So I'll go ahead and get started here. So as Lee mentioned, I'm a cooperative extension specialist in the Department of Entomology at UC Riverside, based off campus at the Kearney Ag Center just outside of Fresno. And our lab primarily does applied ag entomology work in orchards and vineyards, so perennial, deciduous tree and vine crops. So cannabis and hemp is a little bit of an oddity for us, but you know, my background in this traces back to the vineyards, where I was doing work around 2013 as a postdoc on the UC Berkeley campus, and started to run into vineyard operations that were either adjacent to or actually dually involved in cannabis and hemp production. And so started to get some interest in that and talk to those growers and pest control advisors about some of their challenges and how they were producing the crop. And it was right around a few years later that we had the recreational use legalized in California. And so we saw this great expansion in cannabis production, as well as some changes at the federal level with industrial hemp that allowed for that production to expand as well. And it, as a crop, never really fell clearly into, you know, anybody's specific court in terms of some of the agronomic disciplines, entomology, pathology, things like that. And you know, as a new crop, there's a lot of opportunities for developing best management practices. And there was a lot of good stuff that growers were trying, but there's also a lot of misinformation and stuff that was out there. And so my lab started to engage more regularly with both cannabis and hemp production to the extent possible. And I'll talk about some of those limitations here in a minute. You know, to start getting an idea of production challenges and really to start trying to develop an integrated pest management program for both of these crops in California. So what I'm going to talk about is some of the kind of previous work that we've done, some of the constraints that drove the nature of the work that we have carried out to date. And then I'll hand it over to Katie, who has a very strong background in both cannabis and hemp pest management through her PhD studies. And she's someone that came out to the lab about a year ago. And prior to that, she and I were interacting over some of our entomology society meetings. And, you know, when I saw all the work that she had carried out in both Tennessee and Virginia, was really excited to get someone with that expertise out here in California. So she's really made a lot of progress in the last year, and I'm really excited for her to share her results of her work with y'all and as well as what's to come. So without further ado, I'll jump into it here. So what I primarily want to talk about is this survey of California cannabis production that I coordinated with a number of other faculty, primarily on the UC Berkeley campus. What I'll be talking about today is just the pest monitoring and management part. But before I get to that, just want to kind of paint the picture a little bit more broadly, primarily with an emphasis on cannabis production. So that's THC over 0.3% compared to industrial hemp that is not having those psychoactive properties. So what do we know about cannabis production in California? It's really no surprise that California is a key producer. And I've got various estimates listed here of the number of greenhouses and the total value and different ways that people work towards trying to figure that out, since there's been so much production kind of off the books historically. But broadly speaking, we think that California produces about 2/3 of the cannabis that's consumed in the United States. So my entry into this, I mentioned, was kind of around 2013, 2014, and Van Butzik had just started his work on the UC Berkeley campus. He's another cooperative extension specialist, and he was doing a lot of interesting work looking at land use change associated with cannabis. And this coincided with a number of other academics that were starting to look at this in California. So what I'm showing here is just a sampling of some of the headlines and some scientific articles that were really focused on that. So given the clandestine nature of production, there was some component of cannabis production that was, associated with changes in natural habitats, production practices in sensitive areas, things like that. So concerns about environmental impacts of cannabis production, which I should say cannabis production in itself is not any more or less potentially harmful to the environment than almonds or grapes or any of the other crops we grow in the state. But, again, without guidance, without scientifically driven best management practices, there's potential there for negative impacts. And so when we started to survey the resources that were available for growers in terms of pest management in particular, there's kind of this slew of things that are out there. Certain state departments of agriculture, Colorado and Washington most notably, have aggregated some resources that are useful for growers. We're seeing more of this in California now, of course, as well, and I'll mention that in a minute. There's a whole range of different consultants and labs available to growers. There are some publications, I'm highlighting just one here, Marijuana Pest and Disease Control, that have been put together by non-university personnel. There's a number of websites, if you go online, all types of forums where people are exchanging information about cannabis pest control and other dimensions of production. And then, of course, in California, we have Oaksterdam University in Oakland, California, which is a professional training program for cannabis growers and processors. So there are resources out there, and we see this very frequently with, crops or forms of production that don't have as much focused attention from the land-grant university system or from the UC in particular. Growers, create their own knowledge networks, and that's both good and bad. There's sometimes really great information from, experiential learning that growers have, developed over the course of years or decades of growing this crop. But there's also, some potential for misinformation, which can be found in some of these websites and some of these publications. So there's a real concern there in wanting to bring more science into this area. So when we first legalized recreational use, there was a number of different state entities that were created to handle different aspects. We have the California Cannabis Portal, the Bureau of Cannabis Control, the Cal Cannabis Licensing, all of which has recently been collapsed into the Department of Cannabis Control. So you've got the website there. Prior to that, the Department of Pesticide Regulation and the State Water Resources Control Board both were putting up their own and continue to host their own resources, which are, again, just aggregating the best available information for growers. So where is the UC in all of this? We, of course, have this conflict where we receive both state and federal funding, and because of the illegality of cannabis at the federal level, there are some further restrictions that get put on the UC, even though we do have legalized recreational use here in California. So basically our engagement with cannabis potentially could threaten our federal funding. And so I've had regular meetings with the legal team, with the UC Office of the President, as well as UC Riverside and other groups, UC A&R, to talk about this. And they're aware, of course, they want us to engage to the extent possible, but of course there's this, concern. And definitely as federal administrations change, I started this work under the Obama administration, we went through the Trump administration, and now have the Biden administration in place. And there's, different interpretations at the federal level of this situation with each one of those groups. And so that's kind of shifted over time. Broadly speaking, the way we approach this is that our goal is to really address the social and environmental impacts of cannabis production, rather than to directly improve the yields or quality or profitability. That's sort of the the way we frame the work that we're doing. So over the past 5 years, we've also seen the development of a number of these university research centers focused on cannabis and/or hemp. So UC Berkeley was the first group to put together one of these centers, and then shortly thereafter Davis, and then more recently Riverside, my home campus, has started to put together its own center as well. Each one kind of has a different combination of political, economic, agronomic, sociological type of work going on in there. So with all that background in mind, in 2018 we conducted a survey of cannabis production across the state. So we weren't able at the time to actually go to farms and directly measure things or even talk to growers on site. But we were able to conduct an online survey to get growers to self-report what they were doing and what challenges they were facing in their production systems. So this was a multidisciplinary team that I helped to put together and coordinate, that involved, as I've mentioned, multiple people from UC Berkeley. We also had a freshwater ecologist from Nature Conservancy. And so all of us were putting in our relevant questions about production. Myself, of course, very focused on pest and disease management. We had Dr. Bodwich looking at environmental governance, Van Butzik, of course, looking at land use and economics, other members looking at water use and other topics. So a large survey that we put together. And again, I'm just going to focus on the pest and disease management aspects of that survey. So created the survey, put it online in the summer of 2018, and then advertised it through a number of different statewide and regional cannabis grower associations, some of which still exist today. Others have reconfigured or disappeared or aggregated together, but just showing you a list of who all we were working with at that time to distribute the survey, and then jumping right in to the results. So the key arthropod pests that are reported, there's a wide range. There's a preponderance of mite problems that get reported, spider mites and russet mites in particular, thrips as well. And then we have some aphids down here, very frequently reported. And then larvae, this is, again, self-reported data, not very clear what species they may be talking about. But those are some of the dominant insects, along with a whole range of other things that include grasshoppers, cucumber beetle, whitefly, leafhoppers, and fungus gnats. So an interesting first pass. And I should note that we took these findings back to some of those grower associations and some of their leadership and asked, does this kind of reflect what you see just in your personal experience as to what some of the key problems would be? And there was good confirmation that this was, in terms of the respondents that we got, that they weren't reporting things that were wildly different from kind of what is generally discussed across the industry. So now this is the data showing key diseases and vertebrate pests. Powdery mildew, of course, dominant in terms of a major disease affecting this crop, followed by various types of molds. And then we had some types of rots and then other diseases. We didn't have a set list of things for growers to choose from, but rather they were self-reporting, their own data. So there were some descriptions of diseases that maybe weren't clear, or some things that were so minor it was hard to kind of call them out separately. Vertebrates, you have a lot of impacts from gophers, mites, rats, so small vertebrates, and then most likely some of the outdoor growing operations reporting deer or boars, wild boars affecting the crop. So what do people actually do about these pests and diseases? So this is a section of the survey where we were or requesting information on how they actually respond to these. And so I've broken that down into three broad categories. So sprays, I guess what you could call chemical controls, things that you're applying to your crop. Augmentative biological control. So this is where you're releasing beneficial insects into the crop environment to increase natural control. And then cultural controls. So physically destroying plants or mass trapping or intercropping, things like that. So a lot of growers reporting different types of sprays or chemical controls. A lot of them broadly classified as biological. So microbial pesticides, down here we have compost teas, things like that. Again, qualitative data being kind of put into this sort of analysis, a lot of unknown organic compounds. Some folks would say things like organic sprays or everything I spray is organic, but without actually telling us what they are actually spraying. Azadirachtin, that's neem oil, just general oils here, something like stylet oil. We see that used in viticulture and other crops. Soap solutions, sulfur, pyrethrin, and then BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. So these are all, if you look in organic cropping systems, these are, pyrethrin, BT, azadirachtin oils. Those are all very commonly used organic certified pesticides. And this is certainly not surprising because of that federal state disjuncture. There are really no pesticides that are directly registered with the EPA for use on cannabis. So growers are using products available to them that are broadly registered for use on plants that it fits cannabis, but it's not specifically targeted for cannabis. Augmentative biocontrol, you see a lot of different things going on, use of predatory mites, predatory beetles, nematodes, and then a lot of other things. Lacewings were in there, minute pirate bugs were in there, some parasitoid wasps were in there. We do talk a lot to the commercial insectaries in California and abroad, and all of them are reporting an increase in business in California that has coincided with the recreational legalization. So as more people are growing, they're dealing with more pests, they're trying to use these beneficial insects to control them. And then finally, cultural practices, crop sanitation really seem to be the most dominant, frequently reported practice. So basically, when we talk to growers about this, if they see a sick plant or they see a plant that's heavily infested with aphids or some other insect, what do? Just throw it out. And that's one way they can kind of control the spread of that disease or pest problem. So summarizing across all that, the key insects seem to be mites, thrips, and larvae based on this study. Mildews and molds are some of the common diseases, and then various sprays and sanitation and natural enemy augmentation is used as a control strategy. The full results of that survey, you can see that in the citation that I give here. This article is available online through the California Agriculture Journal. And this survey was published as part of a special issue on cannabis in California. So there's a lot of great articles in there looking at other dimensions of cannabis production in the state. So of course, some key limitations to that survey, the insect ID, the disease ID, all of this data is self-reported. It was a self-selecting group that engaged with this survey. So you probably don't have people that are doing, and the opposite of best management practices, worst management practices who would want to go into a survey like this and tell us all the bad stuff they're doing potentially. So definitely a self-selecting crowd. And so you see a lot of good sustainability practices here, but there's definitely a need to do more in-depth surveys and get higher quality data from a wider range of participants. So in line with that, there is some more work that my lab group has become involved with recently. So there's a large project focused on Santa Barbara County. This is being led by Dr. Trish Holden, professor of environmental microbiology in the Bren School at UC Santa Barbara. And in Santa Barbara in particular, with legalization, there was policies in place or that were put in place that allowed a rapid expansion of licensed cannabis cultivation in that county in particular. And there's out of that come a lot of conflicts between non-cannabis and cannabis agriculture, and conflicts between cannabis production and urban or residential populations. And so, as we've seen before, a lot of concern about the environmental impacts. So what we're doing there is a really in-depth series of grower surveys, mapping regional cannabis operations, looking at movement potentially of pesticides used both in cannabis and non-cannabis agriculture into waterways to try to understand what is the extent of environmental impacts, not just from cannabis, of course, that's something we really want to hone in on here, but kind of comparing that to the other agriculture that's already taking place in that region. And then finally, I'll let Katie talk a lot more about this, but we were also recently funded through the CDFA Biologically Integrated Farming Systems Program, which is through the Office of Pesticide Consultation and Analysis, to develop what we're calling the Hemp Agroecology Network. This is building an extension network of hemp growers throughout the state. We're going to be surveying their production practices, characterizing the arthropod community, and then evaluating key management practices. Again, Katie will be talking a lot about this. This is really a project that she's spearheaded, and I'm really excited to see get underway. And I think while it's focused on industrial hemp, there's definitely a lot of applicability of the findings that'll come out of this that'll be useful for our ongoing work in cannabis as well. So with that, just want to say thank you again for giving us the opportunity to share some of our work here. Of course, want to acknowledge all the folks that worked on that survey and the growers and pest control advisors that participated in the survey. You can see my contact information here. I'm sure we can provide that offline as well. And at this point, I will pass it over to Katie, and I think we can do the Q&A for the whole presentation towards the end of the talk. So thanks so much.
All right, so thanks, Houston. That was a really nice, kind of sets the pace for where we are in California with integrated pest management, at least for arthropods in hemp and cannabis. So like Houston said, I'm a postdoc in his lab. We are affiliated with UC Riverside, but we're located off campus in the Central Valley near Fresno. So I've been here for about a year now, and what I'm going to share today is mainly what I've been doing for the past year, planning to kind of tell you where we are as far as arthropod pest management and hemp across the board, where we are in California, and then where we're going to go from there. So again, I've been here for a year now, but I'm coming from Virginia, where a year ago I wrapped up my PhD at Virginia Tech, and the focus of my research there was insect and mite pest management in hemp. So again, coming out here to expand and continue some of that work and just kind of get the groundwork laid in California so that we can take off and help hemp and cannabis growers out here. So to just kind of give you a background, I'm going to tell you what we know about insects and mites, or which we refer to as arthropods in cannabis and hemp as it stands. So there's not a lot. There are a few publications that exist, basically survey projects from, this is one of the rare ones from the 80s. This was actually a sampling project that occurred in a marijuana field in Mississippi. At that time, the University of Mississippi had the only allowable marijuana plants growing in the field. And with those plants, some researchers did some survey work just to kind of document what was there. It's good information, but it's a completely different region from where we are in California. Next is a textbook. It's not so much the gold standard, but it's kind of the book that everyone knows about. It kind of mentions anything and everything that you might see in hemp or cannabis, indoors or outdoors. It's not exactly exclusive to the United States or North America. It's kind of pulling information from wherever it could be obtained, but it is a good reference text to have. Lots of missing information in this that we need to be able to build on moving forward. I think maybe the most relevant right now is a paper led by Whitney Cranshaw that was published in 2019. It's kind of just an overview of hemp pest management in the United States. Again, it's from 2019, but the information in here is still pretty relevant to today. The only limitation with this is that it was written by researchers from Colorado, Tennessee, and Virginia. So not exactly 100% pertinent to California. One of the more recent studies was from Melissa Schreiner and Whitney Cranshaw in 2020. This was Melissa's master's work, and one of the big objectives of her work was to sample insects and mites in hemp fields all throughout Colorado. This is probably the most informative as far as species presence in the crop. But again, it's not the most relevant to us because it's a few states away from here in California. But to sum it up, right now, insect and mite presence, diversity, density in hemp and cannabis is very poorly documented. And the scientific literature that we have to go off of at this time has a very limited relevance to us here in California. So what work has been done in California and kind of what's the situation? I think we probably all know this, but just to restate it, industrial hemp was legalized through the Industrial Hemp Farming Act in early 2017. Cannabis was medically legalized in 1996, but became recreationally legal throughout the state in late 2016. At the end of 2021, as far as hemp goes, California was 5th highest in the nation for hemp production across the board. And we were 2nd highest in acreage devoted to floral or cannabinoid or CBD hemp production. And just kind of how we compare to the rest of the Western region, Colorado is the leader, but we are not far behind in acreage and definitely a leader when it comes to floral hemp production. So Houston just kind of told you what he's done. That's one of the most foundational studies we have in California right now to go off of. These collaborators put together the survey, collected all this information from growers. What we were able to see, just quickly re-emphasizing what he said, lots of mite presence, maybe some larvae, and aphids seem to be the key arthropod pests. And then as far as management, a lot of biological active ingredients and some biological control augmentation. So there are issues going on, but these were self-reported data, and we need to be able to actually go out to these fields, do this sampling, and figure out what's happening in our state, not just rely on a survey, even though it is really good information. So now to the more exciting part, tell you about what I was able to do in 2021 and then where we're going to take that in the future. So as entomologists working with hemp and cannabis in California, our #1 ultimate goal is to develop well-informed IPM plans for the key pests of hemp in our state. The overall goal here is to improve the sustainability of pest management in hemp and cannabis in California. A big part of that is decreasing pesticide use as a form of pest management. But, in order to be able to improve the current situation, we've got to know what's in the crop as it stands right now. What we're seeking to do is determine the arthropod pests of hemp in our state, and not just the pests. We also want to know what potential beneficial and predatory insect or mite species might also be in the crop that are currently helping manage these pests in indoor and outdoor situations. So the first step in this direction of creating this IPM goal was to conduct a survey of insects and mites present in hemp in the summer of 2021. Again, we went through it already, but there are basically no baseline data in the state to go off of. And what we really want to know is the diversity of pests and beneficials, their abundance at different times throughout the seasons, and the potential pest status of each species that we find. So to carry this out, I was able to partner with either growers or research stations at 8 sites across 2 general regions. The areas that we sampled from were here in the Central Valley in Fresno, and along the Central Coast, which was in Ventura County. You can see the sites delineated on the map to the right. The method was to sample these sites every 2 weeks. Started in August, once the plants had a little bit of time to get established in the field. They were entering reproductive growth phase, which is when insects and mites are kind of more attracted and more active in the crop. Again, sampled every 2 weeks and terminated the study just prior to harvest, which ended up being mid-October at all the sites. So to give you an idea of what these locations looked like, these are the Central Valley sites. There were 3 true outdoor sites. You can see the top left and then the photos on the bottom. The photo on the top right was outdoors as well, but it was covered by a shade cloth. So kind of a hoop house, but it wasn't completely closed or anything. So pests could definitely still get in. What the Central Valley sites looked like, there were 2 true outdoor sites. Those are the photos on the right. These were at research stations. 1 true indoor site, which is the photo in the middle, complete exclusion from the elements, from anything that might be able to get in from outdoors. And then the photo on the left was planted under kind of a berry production model. Plants were planted in the soil, but there were hoop houses going over top of them. So for the sampling techniques to collect insects and mites, the most reliable method that we ended up using was a DVAC type suction sampling. So this is a photo from using the DVAC, but basically what it is a converted leaf blower. Instead of blowing out, it's sucking in. What we did was place a paint strainer bag onto the bucket area of this so that any insect or mite that's being suctioned off of the plant is going to get caught in this paint strainer bag, then put those in Ziploc bags, took them back to the lab, and were able to process the specimens at a later date. At each site, though, we stopped at 3 points throughout the field and used the DVAC for 60 seconds at each location. The next sampling technique was I collected leaves and brought those back to the lab, ran them through what we call a mite brush machine to kind of try and brush off any really tiny organisms that might be on the leaves. The key thing we were searching for here was mites. So things like hemp russet mite, broad mite, and then 2-spotted spider mite, as well as some other kind of just smaller organisms like thrips or maybe even aphids if they were present. Additionally, 3 points throughout the field, stopped and collected 10 leaves at random, put those in a bag, brought them back to the lab, and ran them through the mite brush machine. There's not a video to aid my explanation, but basically what this machine does, it has these really fine hairs. You can kind of see in the photo on the right. It's motorized, so the brushes are running. You dip the leaf through the brushes, the mites kind of fall through and disperse into this glass plate with a sticky substance below. You can then put that plate under a microscope and count the number of mites, thrips, or other really small insects or mites that might have come off of the leaves. And then the last sampling technique was visual sampling. Again, 3 points throughout the field. I stopped and observed basically the bud portion of 10 plants in that general area where I stopped. This was particularly to sample for Lepidopteran larvae, which are caterpillars, mites, and aphids. You know, just stopping, looking, and seeing what's naturally occurring on these buds in the field. Looking visually, you know, this is a really good way to look for caterpillars. Aphids you can see with the naked eye, so you'd be able to see those. You can't see all mites without the use of microscopy, but at least for things like spider mites, you could at least observe for webbing. So this was just a supplement kind of to the DVAC and the mite brush machine. All of the specimens, the samples that we collected were brought back to the lab and stored for later processing and identification to lowest taxonomic level. So what we did here was to sort the specimens into what are called morphospecies. And the definition of a morphospecies is a taxonomic species based wholly on morphological differences from similar or related species. So it's basically taking these insects and putting them into groups where, again, they're morphologically different from other insects that you might have collected in the sample. An example, and I'll get to it later, would be leafhoppers. They all kind of look similar, but they've got these subtle morphological differences that are kind of alerting you and letting you know that they're probably not the same species. So it's just a way for us to catalog and keep track of what we were able to find in the field. So this portion of the project was greatly enhanced by these 2 amazing ladies, Sarah Mayorato and Victoria Morelos. They are both in our lab, kind of went through these samples over the fall and really got the gist of the ID of what we found. So in addition to just their knowledge, they use these textbooks as well as online websites such as iNaturalist and Bug Guide to kind of get to the lowest level of taxonomic identification. So now for the exciting part of what we actually found. But as I'm getting into that, I at least want to share that the DVAC sampling was the best source of specimen collecting. Didn't really find a lot of small insects or mites on the leaves that we collected and ran through the mite brush machine. And it didn't really find much in terms of visual sampling to kind of supplement the things that we already found in the lab. Definitely doesn't mean that the insects weren't there, just for whatever reason, I was not able to find them in the sampling methods. And I'll explain a little bit more as we go through this next section. So this is a really busy slide, and I'm going to break this down little by little over the next few slides, but I just wanted to give a broad overview of the different families and groupings that we found here in the Central Valley versus on the Central Coast, and then the number of those specimens combined. So again, it's a lot, but we're gonna break it down little by little. So what we found is that, again, the DVAC sampling, that is the method that led to the greatest collection and the most diversity that we found in our survey efforts. So we found insects and mites across 11 orders, 69 total families, and 157 different morphospecies. Again, that's just kind of grouping and classifying these organisms based on like physical similarities. Overall, we found close to 13,000 specimens. Interestingly, half of these specimens that we collected and processed were whiteflies. So a further breakdown, the order that had the most representatives that we found was order Hemiptera, and these are basically true bugs, things like aphids, also includes whiteflies, seed bugs, plant bugs, stink bugs. A key characteristic of hemipterans is that they have this straw-like mouth part. They don't have chewing mouth parts like you and I or like caterpillars. They basically have a straw that they pierce into the plant and can extract plant nutrients, and that's how they get their sustenance. That's the majority of what we found with and without whiteflies. The second biggest group was Thysanoptera, which are thrips, a lot of those in both locations. And then third was Hymenoptera, which are wasps, ants, and bees. So for some perspective, if you're not familiar with whiteflies, they're really tiny winged insects. They are white, as the name suggests. This is kind of what they look like on the plants. This, of course, is a very extreme case of whitefly presence, but just to show you what it looks like. Next is thrips. This is a really zoomed in photo, but just to show you what they look like. They have this, what we call rasping, sucking mouth part. So they pierce into leaves or stems or just generally all throughout the plant, can extract nutrients and cause these stippling formations that we see on plants. So to go through the most frequently collected specimens in our survey, again, first and the most that we found was whiteflies. Once they get to a site, they can breed really rapidly and expand their populations. They're not super big, you don't want them on your plant, but they're not really weakening the plant or kind of hurting it. You just don't really want the presence on the plant because they can create this sticky substance, which leads to a really undesirable crop yield. Second was a species of Muridae, or a plant bug. This is next to whiteflies. This is the one that we found most frequently. Next is morphospecies 1 of aphids. So interestingly, the aphid that we found the most of was actually not Cannabis aphid. We're currently unsure of this species. Next is an insect in the family Anthocoridae. So these are known as minute pirate bugs. This was really cool to see, actually, because these are beneficial or predatory insect species that can be present in crops and help manage certain pest species like thrips. Next is a coleonid wasp. This is actually a parasitoid wasp, meaning that it's a beneficial species. Not sure exactly what it might have been parasitizing, but it's definitely good to see in high numbers in these plots. Next is an ephedridae fly. Next is Lygus lineolaris. This is the tarnished plant bug. This is a big pest in several agricultural systems. One specifically is cotton. To date, haven't really seen any resulting injury or damage from this plant feeding on hemp, but it's still interesting to see that it's in pretty considerable numbers in California. Next is a species of leafhopper. This is likely the potato leafhopper. Leafhoppers have an interesting relationship with hemp. They can definitely be pests and cause things in the plant like hopper burn or kind of distorted leaves. Still kind of trying to figure out what's going on with leafhoppers in hemp. And the last most frequent collected specimen was another species of leafhopper, a different morphospecies than the potato leafhopper. We're just currently unsure of what this species is. So something that I found interesting in this study was that, based on my work in Virginia, conversations with growers, and then visiting hemp and cannabis growers throughout California, we do have a general idea of what the key insect and mite pests are in this crop, both outdoors and indoors. One of those is cannabis aphid. This one is a specialist that only feeds from hemp or cannabis crops. We definitely found it in our survey, but it wasn't present in, considerable population densities or anything. So I thought this was interesting. It's certainly an issue for growers, but it just wasn't a prominent observation in our survey for whatever reason. Second is corn earworm. If you've grown hemp or cannabis outside, or if you've walked through a field or talked to a grower who does produce outside, you'll know that this is a huge issue. Again, coming from the East and conversations with growers out here, I know that it's still an issue. This insect kind of moves into crops, feeds from buds, which are the marketable portion of the crop, and it can lead to injury that we call bud rot, a really bad situation for outdoor producers. But again, I definitely observed some of these in the outdoor hemp fields that I sampled from, but not really in high enough densities to lead to crop injury, and didn't really show up much in our survey. Two other key mite species are two-spotted spider mite and then the hemp russet mite. These can be huge issues of concern for growers. They can be really challenging to manage, especially hemp russet mite. Similar to cannabis aphid, hemp russet mite is also a specialist, so it doesn't feed from any other crops except for hemp and cannabis. I think they're out there. They just didn't really show up in our survey, but I'll address that in a few slides from now. Some cool things that we saw a lot of generalist predators. So these are things like lacewings, assassin bugs, damsel bugs, adult lady beetles, and then minute pirate bugs. This is something that you really want to see in your field. These can help manage soft-bodied pests, things like aphids, mites to an extent, or whiteflies even. This is, again, a really good thing to see. It means that whatever's happening in the hemp field, it's going really well because it's supporting the existence of these species. We also found a lot of parasitoids, which it was exciting to see. It's super interesting. Not exactly sure what's going on here yet. I'm not sure what kind of species that these parasitoids were targeting, but there was incredible diversity here in these wasp parasitoids. So what these things are, they're really, really tiny wasps. They're a lot smaller than any paper wasp or any wasp that might sting you or, annoy you. These are really little, about the size of a gnat, but what they can do is they'll come into an agricultural system. Many of these are generalists, meaning that they're not specifically targeting a pest species, but they'll make use of a host if it's there. So a lot of times these things could target things like aphids. And what they do is basically lay their egg inside of the pest species. The egg ends up hatching, it grows, it kind of consumes the inside of the pest species. And what hatches out, instead of the pest continuing to live its life cycle, the wasp hatches out instead, and you get a greater presence of natural enemies, or in this case, these parasitoid wasps. So kind of rambling about that, but it was really, really cool and really exciting to see all these in the field. Again, not exactly sure what's going on with these, but this is something that we'll get more information on in the coming seasons. Additionally, we found a lot of leafhoppers, incredible diversity here as well. There were overall 11 different morphospecies of leafhoppers. We don't know all the key species yet. We're getting help from a taxonomist at another university. But, one key concern for outdoor growers, I talked about corn earworm, that's a separate issue. Something that is really specific to us here in the West is an insect called the beet leafhopper. So as the name suggests, one of its preferred hosts is sugar beet. It spreads this virus called beet curlytop virus. What happens, it feeds from an infected plant, moves to an uninfected plant, and kind of shares that pathogen. What does that mean for hemp? We're still kind of working to figure out the life cycle of this insect in a hemp crop outdoors, what its damage looks like, and how much it might actually impact yield. You can see in the photo on the left, this is just a taste of what this insect causes in outdoor hemp fields. It leads to this general chlorosis, or yellowing, browning, the plant turning just generally an unhealthy color. It can also cause stunting or just malformation of leaves and buds on a plant. We obviously know that this is causing a reduction in yield. We just have not quantified that yet. But this is something that, or this species is something that we're going to focus more intently on over the next 2 years. So we'll definitely have more information about this insect's relationship with hemp and how much this might negatively impact yield. Just something I found interesting, we didn't really recover any bees from this study, but bees are overall more attracted to hemp that's producing pollen, which is hemp that's going to be produced for grain or fiber varieties. There is some of that occurring in California, but the majority of the outdoor acreage is going to be focused on cannabinoid production or just cannabis production in general. So it makes sense why we didn't really see that. Another group is stink bugs. Stink bugs are major pests of other crops. We definitely have them out here in a lot of our tree crops or annual crops, such as vegetables or fruits. It can cause yield loss and injury in other crops. Have yet to see that in hemp, but regardless, we only found one stink bug total throughout our survey in 2021. So not anything good or bad. I just thought it was interesting and wanted to share. So, we did our survey. I think it was done well, but there are obvious limitations. One is just that the DVAC, or kind of the reverse leaf blower, may not recover every insect or mite that might be in the field. Something to support that is we found very few larvae, including caterpillars, beetles, so things like lady beetle larvae, which are pretty voracious, as well as the lady beetle adults. And we found very few neuropteran or lacewing larvae. Again, it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just an observation that maybe the DVAC didn't collect everything. We also found few mites. We didn't find any mites in the DVAC sampling or what the DVAC recovered. And even when I was doing the mite brush machine, there was very limited presence of these specimens. So, with that said, we did recover aphids in the DVAC. So I think it's doing a good job, but overall, the thought is just maybe there weren't that many mites or larvae to begin with in these fields this year for whatever reason. So that's a really broad overview of the survey that we did in 2021. So to conclude that section, that sampling effort provided really important baseline information as far as what's present in indoor and outdoor production in California. Again, we saw lots of species, lots of generalist predators and parasitoids that could be aiding the pest management effort in these fields. We are going to continue and expand this effort this coming year and in the few years to come. This year, it'll at least include more sampling regions. So again, we sampled from the Central Valley and along the Central Coast. This summer, we're expanding that to include regions more north, such as around Davis or Sacramento, and then further south around San Diego, just to get a broader picture, because California is so diverse and so many different landscapes present. I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, you know, what we found in our 2021 survey was really great, really cool, but we need to hone in more on actual species phenology. When are these species present? How often are they present? When do their population densities occur in the greatest numbers? You know, just way more information that we need to be able to develop well-rounded IPM plans to manage pest species in this crop. And something interesting to point out is that at all of the sites I sampled from, it was the first year that hemp was produced. So, you know, not to say at all that this crop doesn't have pests, because it certainly does. I think maybe just the fact that it was the first year, there wasn't as great of a pest density as there might be in years to come. So that's why we need to continue this work over the next few years, because it's likely that the arthropod community could change. So to end on a really exciting note, what's coming next is we thankfully just got a really awesome grant. The grant is through CDFA, through the Biologically Integrated Farming Systems Project. Our focus is on hemp agroecology. So this is our project team. It's me, Houston, who you just spoke with, our lab assistant, Victoria, as well as Sarah Light. She's a farm advisor up in the northern region, not exactly Davis, but close to Davis. And then Anna Meek Schilder, she's the rec station director down in Santa Paula or in Ventura County. So this is our working team. What we're going to do is just develop and facilitate a network of hemp growers and, you know, anyone who's working in the crop. So extension specialists, PCAs, consultants, but most importantly, growers, just being a network where everyone is kind of in constant communication. We're really aware of the issues that growers are facing and trying to figure out how we can best address our research questions to fit the needs in the industry. I talked about the 2021 survey, going to expand that this year and in the years to come, but we're still doing work to characterize the insect and mite community in hemp. We want to develop an IPM plan. We have to figure out which pests to manage and how best to do that. Another thing that will be starting this summer is we are going to do an online survey, distributing that out to growers to figure out what current pest management practices they're using and how much that might cost. And the last, this will, you know, we'll kind of use information that we're gaining from year 1 and year 2 of this work to down the road do trials to demonstrate and evaluate the use of biological control, habitat diversification, and use of biopesticides for control of hemp pests. So this is things like testing out natural enemies that can be commercially or purchased from commercial biological control companies. So taking things like predatory mites or lacewings or lady beetles and seeing how well they can aid in management of certain pests like aphids, as well as screening some biopesticides to evaluate their efficacy. So that's kind of everything in a nutshell. We do have a project website. It's through UCANR, ucanr.edu/site/hemp. We'll kind of store all of the information that we're gaining over the next few years and kind of log all of our project progress. So that's all I have today. It was really awesome to be here. I definitely would love to connect with anyone who's interested in collaborating, or if there might be any growers on here, please reach out. I'd love to chat and figure out how we can work together. So thanks for having us.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Katie and Houston, for the wonderful talk. It's really interesting. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A. Are you able to see them?
Yeah. Katie, can you see them?
Yeah. So, okay, we'll just address these two. First, are there any volatile compounds from cannabis or hemp that attract any of the insect pests or predators? Don't know exactly what the volatile compounds might be. And I don't want to say that compounds coming from hemp are specifically attracting any of these pests. I did mention hemp russet mite and cannabis aphid. These are species that specifically feed only from hemp or cannabis. So I think, they're definitely there for the hemp or cannabis crop. But one thing that I've observed, especially from working with corn earworm, it seems like this plant is so attractive and so just fragrant and emitting all kinds of things that, it is attracting a lot of species, both pest and beneficial. So for what it's worth, kind of my spill on that. And then your second question, do any of the insect pests vector any significant diseases? The most significant one that we know of is the beet leafhopper that I talked about. It transmits this virus called beet curly top virus, which leads to stunting or malformation of the plant. And it definitely is leading to yield loss. We just haven't been able to quantify that yield loss yet. Houston, you want to add anything else?
No, I think you covered it well.
Actually, Katie, I have a question for you.
Great.
So is the diversity of pest species that you found at the farm affected by the other crops that are grown in the vicinity of the farm? Just to see, you see any correlation or association between the different type of crops?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's definitely some of an influence, like especially at the research stations where there's just a vast, broad diversity of crops that are being produced. So a couple things. Yes, I think it is, at one site in particular, at least in the field, I saw a good presence of corn earworm that again was at a research station, and the kind of crop complex surrounding the hemp field was corn and sorghum, which corn earworm is a pest of both. So it makes sense that numbers were higher there, at least visually. At certain spots, we have a lot of tree crops out here, which one of the key pests of tree crops, and our lab does a ton of work with this insect, is navel orange worm. Didn't really see any of that in hemp. So at least for now, that's a really good thing. Hopefully that continues. Plant bugs, so things like leaf-footed bugs and stink bugs are huge pests of tree crops as well. Didn't really recover a lot of those in hemp. So I guess to sum that up, yes, but no.
Yeah, I think it's good to see, like, in the future, right? When you have multiple years data, they'll be really informative, and to see if they get to establish in hemp or not.
When we first started to grow pistachios in California, there was something similar occurring where there was a different pest complex, a really limited pest complex early on, to where people were, claiming, this is well before my time, but, pistachio, it's disease and pest free or minimal, it's such a great crop, and things slowly kind of started to establish on it. And I feel like that's kind of what we've been seeing, especially at some of the experiment stations where we have all these different crops and there's insects cruising around, and we collect them on a hemp plant and are wondering, is this a pest? Is it just trying it out? So like you're saying, multi-year data sets, multi-region data sets, that's all the type of stuff that Katie's starting to generate. I'm really excited to see that start to come in here as of last year, and then going forward, of course.
Great, thank you. I want to remind everyone that our next forum will be on June 9th at 11 o'clock, and it will be the last forum for this academic year. The forum will be given by 3 recipients of the Research Investment in Cannabis and Hemp, or REACH Award. So this is an award like internally at UC Davis. So we'll have 3 colleagues to share their stories. So I want to thank Katie and Houston again for this wonderful webinar, and thank you everyone for attending the forum today. I hope to see all of you again in June. Bye everyone.
Thanks.
Oh wait, really quick. There was one more question. Yeah, so Kirk asked if there's anything being set up like IR4s to get more insecticide and miticide material available? That's a great question. And yes, there's definitely work going on. We've been part of this project. I was part of it in Virginia for hemp. We are not working on hemp in California right now with IR4, but they are setting up trials. I think they have a hemp russet mite trial right now and maybe something else. But, you know, we, not for cannabis, only for hemp, because cannabis is still not federally legal, where IR4 is a more federal organization. They can't work with cannabis since it's still federally illegal. But they're working to get hemp added to labels. We're working to screen products in our lab just to get overall efficacy, see how well these products are actually working. I was going to say something else. I think, you know, you can look on CDFA website or the DCC website, but nothing's fully legal for use on cannabis right now. It kind of has to just fit within that gray area of, it's not illegal to use it and it's not explicitly prohibited from the label. So I think that's going to be the situation for the foreseeable future, which is unfortunate, but it's what we have to work with.
That's
Great.
everything.
Okay, that was the last one.
question.
Yeah, thanks, Lee.
Yeah, again, see you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.